What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Cumberland Valley lab, scientific lab here at the Chambersburg location. And I'm going to talk briefly, hopefully as briefly as I can, about an incident or a situation that happened this week that has a lot of moving parts. There was a lot of things done that could have been done differently, more safe, less safe, but I'm going to touch on just one aspect of this incident or this situation, because there's no standard that addresses this, at least not that I know of. And when we are taught things, there's rarely, when we're taught felling cuts, like using a chainsaw from the ground, cutting whole trees down, and then when we're taught to make cuts up in the tree, whether it's removing the top or big limb or lead or a large section of a tree, there's a few things we take into consideration, but there's rarely a line drawn where it goes from, is this a felling cut or is this a topping cut? So describe for you the situation. We're the company cutting down a black walnut tree, probably in the 50 to 65 foot height range, and it was no cleanup. All the debris could stay on site. Fairly big drop zone. But there were some obstacles nearby. There was a fenced off garden, and all we had to do was put this thing on the ground. The crew leader decided to shorten the tree severely and then fell the rest of the log. However, the cut did not go as planned, and the top he cut out tipped towards a fenced-off garden area and damaged the fence. That's why I learned about it, because there was an incident report, this fence needs fixed. So upon investigation and talking to the crew leader, a lot of things I determined. There's a lot of variables, and I don't want this to be a whodunit, this is his fault, this is what he did wrong type of video or report. I would rather it be a, hey, here's what we're not going to do again. So the only aspect of this incident that I want to bring up is that there's a few mistakes made, but in my opinion, the biggest mistake and the biggest thing that we need to change and make sure it doesn't happen again, or make sure is very well understood, is the size of a top that this gentleman decided to take out. So the top of the tree in question, like I said, was about 50 to 65 feet tall, and this gentleman took a huge top. He was about 10 or 15 feet off the ground, made a big cut, was trying to send the whole canopy just out into the drop zone, which again, if you have room for it, I'm a fan of sending things if it is safe to do so, if you can tie in properly, if you're for sure this is going to work. So I'm going to make a blanket statement right now and expect to see this in writing at some point, but I would highly advise against taking a top that is more than 50% of the tree. I would advise against taking a top that is more than about 30 or 40% of the tree, just because most of your I can't even make that generalization, but I've never read an incident report that started with, we were taking a small limb, or after removing this small piece, or when we took a small top out with a tagline in it. Usually those incidents start with, climber decided to take a massive top, was using a 3-foot bar to make this cut up in the tree. You know, when you're starting to use a 2-foot size bar to take the top of a tree out, you got to start questioning whether that's the safest thing to do. I'm a huge fan of just climbing a little bit longer, a few more minutes, make some smaller cuts, rig a piece out, take a smaller section. But here's the nuts and bolts of what I want to talk about. Why is it unsafe to take a large top? So if this is our tree, right? Big dogwood tree here. And man, maybe I can take this whole top here. I got to consider lean. I have to consider what type of wood it is, what type of tree species, how my saw's cutting, how hard the lean is, what kind of cut am I going to use. Because if you're making a cut that you have to consider lean, making a bore cut, things like that, I'm going to just say, hey, it's probably not the best decision to take a top that big or a log that big. Because if something splits up there, you have no escape route. The saving grace on the ground when you're when you're cutting a big tree down, and it could be a hazardous tree, we could have to pull it over, it could have a hard lean. We can do everything right on the ground and things still go wrong occasionally. We still accidentally cut through a hinge. We still have bypass when we make our notch. Maybe there's a defect in the tree. Maybe it's an ash and it has some shake in there and it barber chairs anyhow. I've seen that happen. On the ground, we have our escape route. As long as we have that, ability to get away from the stump, we're in the clear. In a tree, we're tied in right there and we can't go anywhere. We are in the line of fire. If something goes wrong, it's going to go wrong. We're going to be attached to it. And that's where bad things happen. I don't want to be involved. I don't ever want to have to show up at a job site where somebody's been severely hurt up in a tree, whether they're still there or now they're on the ground. I don't ever want to have to deal with that. I don't ever want to have that meeting. So, when we're on the ground, we have that escape route. When we're in the tree making this cut, if something happens here, if there's a defect that you don't see, if this decides to barber chair, if the force of this coming over is too much for the bottom section of the tree to withstand, and something happened below you, those are all possibilities. Those are all things we probably haven't accounted for. So let me back up. This meeting is going to go a little longer. The video is going to go a little longer than I expected, as most of them do. So when we take the top of a tree out, whether it's this big or whether it's, an appropriate size, maybe a quarter or even less, when that thing comes over, all right, a lot of things are happening. And this also depends on the type of notch we use. Are we using a traditional notch that's kind of narrow, 45-degree angle, or are we using a open face notch? So that top has to clear the stem you're attached to for you to be safe, right? It has to come off and be clear of you to not cause you harm. But even before that, as that top starts to come over, what's the stem doing? Stem's going to move back. It's going to take some pressure because now your weight is still connected out here. It's going to move back. And then most likely it's going to spring forward a little bit before your hinge breaks, or I should say before your notch closes and your hinge breaks, and then you're released to go on a little bit of a ride. And I'll admit, that's a fun experience. To have a top go exactly where you want it to, be up there when the hinges or notch is closing, hinge breaks, slides off there just right. That's a cool feeling. But when you're trying to do that with something large, like more than half the tree, way too much could go wrong in that, in my opinion. So why shouldn't we do this? Well, let's say you get away with it one time. All right, you do this once, you fit that thing in there, you leave a 15-foot stub and 50 feet of tree lay in the yard. Great. You just saved yourself an hour of labor or so. But maybe next time your ground person, who's now a climber months down the road, saw you do that, they put it in their mental toolbox and they thought, someday I'm going to do that and it's going to be awesome. And the next chance they have to do that is with a dead ash tree, dead oak tree, something like a poplar or a white pine that doesn't have the wood characteristics of the tree you just cut down. So let's say they do that with a dead tree. And when that thing starts to come over, instead of the stem being able to take that force, the stem snaps off at the ground. Or maybe the hinge fails and it rolls a little bit and twists off the stump. Or maybe it slabs, which is the opposite of a barber chair, where it would actually tear part of the stem off the tree as it came over. Way too many things can go wrong when we take a huge top out of a tree when we're climbing. And I'm going to say that's even the case in a bucket. Even though we're protected and we can move away from the cut, the truck's probably still in the drop zone or within range of that piece we're cutting. So massive top, probably still a bad idea. But more importantly, so let's say, the stem is able to take that. This top comes over. What if that top rolls a little bit? And now maybe one of these big limbs that were giving it some side weight are on the bottom. And now it hits the ground before it's off the stump. It has to go somewhere. It's either going to get hung up here and maybe the hinge stays attached. Maybe you used an open face notch and it's going to stay here. Now you got to figure out how to get that thing down. Good luck. Or it hits the ground first before coming off the stump and then wants to roll one side or another similar to a barber chair, probably going to come down close to you. It might tear the bark or slab a piece of wood off the side of the stem, pull you down the tree. It could, if you're in a bad position or not ready for it, it could wipe you right off the side of the tree. If I was a little more savvy with YouTube and ripping videos off there, I could show you one where a guy got wiped clean off the side of an ash tree because of this. He was cutting a big top, it barber chaired, and when it came down past the stem, took him out. Took him right out. I don't know what the end result was. All I know is where the video stopped, he did not look good. He was folded over backwards, the way your back does not like to bend. Again, you're going to see something about this written up. I'm probably even going to write a short paragraph and submit this to ANSI because I think it should be addressed. If you're cutting a top that big, 60, 70, 80% of the height of the tree, I'm going to call that a felling cut. You're just leaving the stump high. In which case, you should have an escape route, 45 degrees away from the cut, so that you're clear of everything. Can't do that if you're tied into the stem. So let's just say right now, it is company policy, an unwritten rule, soon to be written, that we do not take tops, we do not make topping cuts larger than 50% of the height of the tree. Because that should be a mental threshold. If you're taking half the tree out, maybe the situation would allow for that. Maybe you can get away from it. Maybe there's nothing in the drop zone. Maybe it's down over an embankment and it doesn't matter what's going to happen underneath you. But you still have to be there to make that cut. There's still way too much that can go wrong. 50%, 40, 30, 25, even less is better. Again, I rarely ever read an incident report or an injury report or a fatality report from the TCIA that starts out with while cutting a small piece or while cutting a top that was 10 inches in diameter. Usually involves something large, something heavy, and something that can go wrong. That's 12 minutes. That's way too long for me to be talking on a video. But I want you to think about this. And the next time you think about, making that massive cut out of the bucket or while you're climbing, I want you to think again, because if you have not seen something split, something slab, or something barber chair, if you keep doing stuff like that, you will. I do not want you to be in the way of that. I want you to steer clear of it. I want that to be a situation that you have planned for, you've anticipated, and that you can step away from. Because we've all cut those trees down where we know something might go wrong, but we've taken every precaution imaginable. The client knows the risk, the crew leader knows the risks, and we're prepared for it. I don't want that to happen while you're tied into that tree and you're 50 feet off the ground. Hey, Brad, what's up, man?
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Hold on, I'm almost done. It's all right. It's our farm manager. That's all I got. I'll see you guys later. Now it's organic.